There is so much beauty in the natural world, and escaping to the wilderness to soak up the sights and sounds of nature can be very healing and therapeutic. But there are also many dangers when it comes to exploring the outdoors. One misstep can send you careening down a mountainside or falling victim to a predator. Join us for today's episode as we examine 3 eerie cases of people who vanished in the forest. Alfred Beilhartz. In 1938, the Beilhartz family, which included 11 children, lived on Quebec Street in Denver, Colorado. In early July of that year, they decided to spend a weekend camping in the Rocky Mountain National Park. They set up camp around a quarter of a mile west of the Fall River Lodge, and on the morning of Sunday the 3rd, the family patriarch, William, woke early and walked to the nearby stream with his 4-year-old son Alfred to wash up. Family friends that had accompanied them on the trip, Oran Bronson and Walter Hansen, also headed to the stream and washed up a short distance upstream. After William had finished, he headed back to camp, but Alfred waited behind for Oran and Walter. It wasn't until the two returned to camp that the rest of the family noticed that Alfred wasn't with them. They quickly began searching for the 4-year-old, and given how many people were present at the campsite, they believed they would find him soon. The family thought that Alfred had simply gotten distracted by something and wandered off near the camp on the way back, and as he was so young, he wouldn't be able to get far on his own. The search party called the little boy's name and looked closely amongst plant life and trees, but there was no sign of him, and he never called back. The family alerted park authorities to his disappearance shortly afterwards. A ranger at the Fall River Ranger Station roped in over 100 more people to help with the search efforts, which continued into the following day. Scent dogs that were brought in failed to find anything useful. There were few theories as to what had become of Alfred, but the main one, which the rangers followed, was that the little boy had fallen into the roaring river nearby and was pulled under, ultimately drowning. On July 5th, they decided to build a dam in order to divert the river so they could search the water for his remains. However, nothing was found, and the search of the river ended on July 6th. A wire net had been set up to catch evidence, but this led to no leads either. Alfred's parents believed that he had been taken while on his way back to the campsite. They didn't believe that he could have gotten so far on his own. Though the ground search continued, hope was fading fast. Volunteers speculated that he had drowned, been abducted, or gotten lost in the woods and succumbed to the elements. The search was ultimately called off 10 days after Alfred disappeared. In the days after he went missing, witnesses began to step forward. One man, William Eels, recalled seeing a small child while hiking in the park on July 3rd with his wife. He stated that the couple had stopped to rest at around 1 p.m. while journeying up the Old Fall River Road when they looked up at Mount Chapin to see a young boy sitting atop a rocky area known as the Devil's Nest, about 6 miles from where Alfred was last seen. The witnesses described that the boy made a shrill noise and that he either left or was pulled back from the ledge just afterwards. The couple decided to check on the boy to make sure he was okay, but by the time they arrived at the rocky outcrop, there was no one there. When they returned to their car later on, they heard of Alfred's disappearance on the radio. Back at home, Alfred's case had already hit the newspapers. They noticed that the boy in the photographs bore a striking resemblance to the child they'd seen on their trip. They subsequently returned to the park to alert the rangers of what they'd seen. Though park rangers didn't believe that a 4-year-old could have made it up the mountainside, they searched the area anyway, but nothing was discovered. Another witness in Big Spring, Nebraska, believed she had seen Alfred and an unidentified man on July 8th. They were walking along the highway together as the witness and her husband drove out of Big Spring, heading for Ogallala. The next day, she read about Alfred in the newspaper and saw his photograph. It was only then that she realized what she'd seen could be important. She promptly told her brother-in-law of the sighting, who then alerted a Denver detective. However, this sighting never went anywhere, and it's still unclear today if the witness really saw Alfred or if it was another young boy who looked like him. For months, the Beilhartz family were at a loss. Then on November 27, 1938, they were surprised to discover a ransom note. It read, "Sorry for your son. We went west, out of money. The boy doesn't take to us. We will return your son if you leave $500 in a can 1 block from your house and the note. We will return your son within 24 hours. Within 2 days, however, the police established that the note was a hoax. 2 individuals were investigated in connection with it, but they were never named nor formally charged, and it's unclear why. Alfred was never found, and it's unknown what became of him. Due to the passage of time, his case is no longer being investigated. Derrick Engebretson. 8-year-old Derrick Engebretson was last seen on December 5, 1998. That day, Derrick, his father, and his grandfather all traveled from Bonanza, Oregon to the Winnemere National Forest to carry out their annual tradition of chopping down their perfect Christmas tree. By all accounts, Derrick was familiar with the outdoors. He went exploring with his parents often, and he grew up on forested land, adopting a love of mushroom picking from an early age. He had fun tagging along on hunts with his father and enjoyed spotting deer and bears in the woods. Upon arriving at the forest, the trio purchased permits for 3 trees and began their hike. After a short while, Derrick began to fall behind, so his grandfather, Bob, fell into step with him to make sure he didn't get lost. The older man kept one eye on his grandson and his other on the trees, looking for an ideal Christmas tree, but Derrick soon decided that he wanted to run and catch up with his dad. Eventually, Bob gave the okay, and the little boy ran off. As Bob followed behind, he noticed that the footprints of both Derrick and his father Robert appeared to match, and assumed that the 8-year-old had caught up with his dad. However, a short time later, Bob finally caught up with Robert. Derrick wasn't with him. Robert said that he'd instructed the little boy to stay with his grandfather, but Bob hadn't seen Derrick since he'd run off to catch up with his father. Despite the short amount of time that had lapsed, Derrick was nowhere to be seen. The 2 men called his name, but received no response. Concerned for the 8-year-old's safety, he was reported missing shortly afterwards when Robert and Bob notified a passing motorist who drove 2 miles to the nearest resort to call the police. Authorities and volunteers soon began searching for Derrick, as although he was accustomed to the outdoors, the snow and freezing temperatures caused many to fear that he would not be able to stay alive for very long on his own. Initially, a crude shelter was discovered, made of fir boughs beneath some fallen logs not far from where Derrick went missing. Police hoped their scent dogs would be able to pick up his trail, but they were unable to do so. They also found footprints which made a loop from where his father last saw him to a clearing in the road where a snow angel was found, believed to have been made by the 8-year-old. The surrounding tracks had been covered with snowfall or removed by a snowplow, and in the following hours, a snowstorm made it impossible for them to search further. On December 13th, a week after Derrick went missing, Klamath County Police suspended the search, but his family kept looking, hosting independent searches with the help of volunteers. Another 5 days later, on December 18th, search efforts ceased due to the freezing temperatures, which made it unsafe to continue looking. A $1,000 reward was offered by employees at Jackson County Financial for anyone who could locate Derrick alive, but it went unclaimed. In January 1999, a bookmark from Bonanza School, where Derrick was a student, was discovered in the forest by a hiker. They also found a food wrapper and several small spots of blood. These clues were found a few miles from where Derrick was last seen by his grandfather, but never led to a greater discovery. Around this time, his family put together a $20,000 reward. In May, further searches were carried out since the weather was milder and the snow had melted. Scent dogs and volunteers aided in the search, but nothing was discovered. That same year, graffiti was discovered scrawled on the wall of a public bathroom. The exact phrase used has never been disclosed, but investigators stated that it was Derrick specific. A portion of the bathroom wall was removed for testing, but it was ultimately concluded the graffiti was a hoax. His mother, Lori, said that the graffiti suggested he had been abducted. Several years after he went missing, investigators did examine the possibility that somebody had taken Derrick. They appealed to the public for help identifying and locating a late Model 2-door Honda painted black, which was seen in the area on the day he vanished. They believed it was driven by a man who might have stopped and asked for directions in the nearby Rocky Point in Klamath County, Oregon. One witness came forward shortly afterwards, stating that he'd seen a man struggling with a young boy near the area on the day that Derrick went missing. The witness stated that they did not stop because they believed it was a family dispute. It's unknown if the boy seen that day was Derrick. In 2004, 6 years after the disappearance, investigators announced that a convicted child rapist named Frank J. Milligan was the prime suspect in Derrick's case. Milligan was once an aide on a children's psychiatric ward and was convicted of abducting a 10-year-old boy in 2000, after which he sexually abused the child before slashing his throat. The 10-year-old survived the attack, and Milligan was sentenced to 60 years in prison. He was also convicted of another child sexual abuse offense. Milligan came to the attention of police in Derrick's case when an inmate told investigators that he had bragged about killing the 8-year-old during his time in prison. When confronted with this information, Milligan confessed and agreed to plead guilty if he was spared the death penalty. He also offered to take authorities to Derrick's remains. However, a search of the area he was supposedly buried in turned up nothing, and Milligan subsequently recanted his confession. He's never been charged in the case, but he is still suspected of involvement. Investigators theorize that Derrick made it to the road on the day of his disappearance, only to have been picked up by Milligan. Meanwhile, after Milligan recanted his confession, Derrick's parents came to the conclusion that he was not involved. For years after he went missing, Derrick's family searched for him, but he has never been located. A memorial was placed on a tree at the spot he was last seen. 20 years later, his mother Lori stated, "I want to believe that he's still alive to this day, and until somebody shows me something different, I don't think I'm ever going to give up on him." 8-year-old Derrick James Engebretson was last seen in Winnemere National Forest in Klamath County, Oregon on December 5, 1998. He is described as a white boy with brown hair and hazel eyes. At the time of his disappearance, he was 4'6" and weighed around 85 pounds. He was wearing a blue snowsuit, a denim jacket, navy blue trousers, a black sweatshirt, an Oakland A's t-shirt, a hat, camouflage print boots, and gloves featuring the Goosebumps logo. He has dog bite scars on his chin, under his nose, and between his nostrils, and he has a cow lick. If he is still alive, he will be 34 years old. Anyone with information about Derrick's disappearance can contact the Klamath County Sheriff's Office at 541-883-5130, or alternatively, you can contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-843-5678. Trenny Gibson. In 1976, 16-year-old Trenny Lynn Gibson lived with her parents and 3 siblings in Knoxville, Tennessee. She was a clever and hard-working girl who always made an effort to save the wages she made while working part-time at the cafeteria in her local mall. She loved plants, trees, and all aspects of nature, with her favorite class at school, Bearden High School, being the horticulture class. She hoped to study landscape architecture at university. Trenny's mother accompanied her to school on the morning of October 8, 1976. The teenager was all set up for a school trip to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park that day as part of her beloved horticulture class, but poor weather conditions, rain, and the cold made her wonder if it would go ahead. When she asked a classmate, they confirmed that it would. Trenny took her lunch with her but left her bag, books, and coat in the car. After parting ways with her mother, Trenny got onto the bus with her 38 classmates. The bus set off at around 9 a.m. and 3 hours later pulled into the Coahe car park. The class teacher, Wayne Dunlap, was supervising the trip and was the only adult present. He told the students that he would be hiking to Andrews Bald using the Forney Ridge Trail and would return to the bus at 3:30 p.m. to head back. They were advised not to go further than Andrews Bald, and to always stay on the path and avoid taking shortcuts, even if it seemed tempting. They were also told not to interfere with the plant life. Following this, the students headed off, splitting into smaller groups. Since Trenny didn't have a jacket, her classmate, Robert Simpson, who was both her friend and a friend of her 19-year-old brother, offered her his, which she accepted. Upon reaching Andrews Bald, the pair sat down for lunch. After they'd eaten, Trenny announced that she was ready to go back to the bus, but Robert said that he wanted to stay at the spot for a little longer. As a result, Trenny set off on her own at around 1:30 p.m. On her journey, she caught up with some of her classmates, including Bobby Coghill, who walked next to her as Trenny was a brisk walker and the others were much slower. 5 minutes later, they came across another group of students, but while they decided to stop and rest, Trenny stated that she wanted to keep going. They were just around half a mile from the car park at this point. Yet another group of students saw her on her way. She was invited to sit with them, but she declined and kept walking. They saw her stop and crouch down, looking at something off to the right of the trail before she exited the trail in that same direction. There was no side path here. In fact, there was little but some shrubbery, rocks, and a small creek. Another student walked to where Trenny was last seen and couldn't see her. They called the 16-year-old's name, but received no response. The student walked on anyway, thinking she must have gone back to the bus. At 3:40 p.m., everybody was back on the bus except Trenny. Robert Simpson, Trenny's friend, was the first to notice she wasn't there. He asked around, but nobody had seen her. He claimed that while Trenny headed back to the bus, he had spent some time tracking a bear, although nobody was able to corroborate that part of his story. The class teacher, Wayne Dunlap, headed to the Bald in search of Trenny, accompanied by another student, but there was no sign of her. A ranger was contacted shortly afterwards, arriving at 4:30 p.m., but no trace of Trenny was discovered. She was reported missing shortly afterwards, and a formal search was conducted by park authorities. Wayne stayed behind at the park to help in the search, while students were returned to Knoxville, gossiping that the 16-year-old had run off with someone. In the following hours, a group and air search ensued, but as 8 p.m. approached, attempts to look for Trenny were hampered by the bleak, foggy, rainy weather. Around this time, her parents were informed of her disappearance. Her father headed to meet with park officials, armed with clothing that his daughter had recently worn. Authorities hoped that scent dogs would be able to follow her trail. At 3 a.m., the search was called off for the night, but it started up again the next day. The road between the car park and Newfound Gap was closed off, and canine units were brought in. Side trails between the car park and Andrews Bald were thoroughly scoured, but there was little to go on. At the spot where Trenny was last seen by her classmates, investigators noticed broken ferns, a beer can, and 3 cigarette butts. The following day, 8 cigarette butts from the same brand were located along a road near Newfound Gap, an area that the dogs had traced her scent to. Search efforts continued until October 22nd, but petered out completely after November 2nd. Over 700 people helped look for the missing 16-year-old, but little evidence was found. In April of 1977, Trenny's father, Robert Gibson Sr., organized another search, which lasted until early May. But again, no clues were discovered. The chief ranger at the time told the media he did not believe she was in the park. Even in 1981, another search was carried out, but to no avail. There are only a few leads in Trenny's case, with the most prominent being that she got lost somewhere off the trails and succumbed to the elements. One classmate and a friend stated in 2017 that her belief was that Trenny had planned her disappearance. However, her parents put forward the theory that a teenager named Kelvin Bowman was involved. On October 11th, 1975, Bowman, a fellow student at Bearden High, attempted to break into their home. Trenny's mother, Hope, shot him in the foot, and he was arrested, charged, and was sentenced to time in a juvenile corrections facility. Though he was given 2 years, he was released after 6 months and returned to school around the time of Trenny's disappearance. While attending court, he reportedly made threats to harm the teenager upon his release. There was some speculation that Bowman and Trenny were in a relationship, but because he was a black teenager in Tennessee in the 1970s, her parents would not approve, and they sought to downplay this idea. The school's principal claimed that Bowman was in classes on the day that Trenny went missing, but some students claimed that he'd followed the bus to the mountains that day in his car. The principal denied this possibility and was adamant that Bowman had attended all of his classes. Another potential suspect in the case was Trenny's friend, 17-year-old Robert Simpson. The pair often went on short car rides together, as Simpson had his license, and while he was said to be fond of the 16-year-old, they did not appear to have a romantic relationship. Simpson was the person who'd spent the most time with Trenny that day, and also the one who sat next to her on the ride to the park. He reportedly told Tina Gibson, Trenny's younger sister, "If Kelvin Bowman has Trenny, he will kill her. If he doesn't have her, I think she might run off with some horny hitchhiker. Simpson reportedly came to the family home to tell her this while her parents were out participating in the search. Stranger still, Trenny's comb, identifiable by the brand, style, and the fact that her sister had an identical one, was found on the dashboard of Simpson's car. When asked about it, he claimed that Trenny had given it to him to keep for her. Notably, Trenny carried the comb everywhere she went. Though Simpson was considered a suspect at one point, he was never charged. Sometime after Trenny went missing, a necklace and ring, which she had been given as gifts, were discovered in the possession of another student at her high school. The girl could not adequately explain how she came by them, and no further leads came of this. Some reports state that Trenny was wearing this jewelry on the day of her disappearance. In the months after she went missing, there were numerous sightings of girls resembling Trenny in various parts of the US. One report claimed that she'd gone to Bryson City to get married, while another report stated that she'd got on a plane in Newark, New Jersey, with a much older man. One hospital in North Carolina believed they may have treated Trenny on October 8th, but when confronted with her photograph, staff could not be sure of her identity, and it was later determined that the girl who was treated was somebody else. Between 1991 and 1994, law enforcement was in communication with the National Park Service 6 times in regards to remains found in the park boundaries, which may have belonged to Trenny. None of them did. Almost 50 years later, Trenny Gibson's case is still unsolved. She was last seen in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Tennessee, on October 8, 1976. She is described as a white woman with brown hair and green eyes, and she was 5'3" tall and weighed around 115 pounds at the time of her disappearance. When she went missing, she was wearing a blue blouse, white striped sweater, blue jeans, blue Adidas brand shoes, and she'd borrowed a brown plaid heavy jacket from Robert Simpson. She was possibly wearing a star sapphire and diamond ring too, which was later found in the possession of another student. If Trenny is still alive, she will be 64 years old. Anyone with information about her case can call the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation at 615-744-4000, or alternatively, you can contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-843-5678. And there you have the facts. Please leave a comment down below with your own theories and speculations, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.